you. It's good to be with people who are like-minded. Michelle's been posting some great stuff on the Facebook group. I attended a talk by Tom Seeley that was free last night, which was fantastic. So you might want to go and check that out and see. There's quite a few speakers coming up, and quite a few of them were the ones that you suggested that you'd like to hear about in our meetings. It's on Eventbrite, I believe. You also asked for a beekeeping calendar, and so we're going to start off every meeting with Marion Whittam, who we're really happy to have back in any capacity, but certainly presenting the beekeeping calendar every month, just for a quick intro to our meetings. So Marion, you can go ahead.
Thanks, Lucy. Good evening, everyone. I am very pleased to be able to present this beekeeping calendar every month. And it's just a reminder of the tasks that beekeepers need to do each month to prepare for their ultimate beekeeping in the spring, summer, and fall. So February is one of these cold months. It's getting more towards spring, but we still have to let bees be bees. They just need to do their own thing. They need to just rest and so on. But some of the things the beekeeper can do for themselves is register their hives with OMAFRA so that they are completely legal and registered. And at the same time, join the OBA and purchase the liability insurance. And in order to join the OBA, you need to have the OMAFRA registration. So that's really important. The other thing you can do when you can get into your hives later on, if they're snowbound now, is post your registration. It needs to be there. They need to know who owns those hives that are there. So that's an important part of the regulation also. Think about enrolling in spring education, or as Lucy had said, follow some of these seminars that are free on the net. And there are some wonderful ones, including Randy Oliver is in April. He is a noted bee expert on varroa mites. So all kinds of interesting stuff there. If you are going to need nukes in the spring or queens, now is the time to do it so that you get on that list and you'll be able to have them when you want them. Now, with respect to your hives themselves, keep those entrances clear and the covers secure. Our hives are in Muskoka. There's a lot of snow up there, so it's very important that you do that. Do some education and reading for sure. There's lots of good books out there that you could take a look at, and lots of information on the net also. And start planning your season. It's going to be here before we know it. Order any new equipment that you may need, and take a look at your old equipment, your equipment you had already. Do you have enough frames? Do you have enough feeder pails? Do you have enough bottom boards? What kind of repair are your hive that equipment in? And repair anything that is broken. And I'm going to lead into Tom in a second. One of the ones is lift your hives to check the weight, to see how the stores are and how they're managing with the stores. And Tom's going to talk much more about that. So I'm going to turn that over to Tom. All of the reference that I used tonight is from the OBA Beekeeping Calendar. So there is a good beekeeping calendar that gives us guidance. That's an official one from the Ontario Beekeepers Association. Thanks so much.
Okay, I'm back. You guys can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Marion.
Yeah,
should I
you're
just,
ready to go?
I'm ready to go. Should I just jump in there?
Yes, sorry, I just want to welcome you and to thank you because again, we're terribly missing Terry, and it was they were big shoes to follow in. And Tom is our go-to whenever we're looking for somebody, and he's always ready and willing to help and jump in and help us with this Be Educated part. So we really appreciate that, Tom.
Okay, thanks, Lucy. My pleasure. I was actually quite enjoy doing this. Today I'm going to talk about how I prepare my bees for winter, what I do to sort of do my best to make sure they survive the winter, and also going to talk about, you know, some of the things we could do if we didn't do our preparations and maybe we dropped the ball and things weren't done in a timely fashion. And again, I always like to say, there's many ways to overwinter bees, and there's many ways to manage bees. So tonight I'm basically talking about the way I manage. Not trying to convince anyone to do it the way I do it. And just looking back over my photos the last couple of years, I chuckle to myself because I think, oh, I don't do that anymore. I don't use that equipment anymore. You know, I used to believe that, but I don't anymore. So for me, I'm constantly evolving in how I keep bees. So I'm not one of these people who think, you know, always and never. And so basically what I'm talking about is how I do it today, and it can very well change. So let's get on with it a bit. Okay, why is my... having a problem advancing my screen for some reason. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. Okay, just a little bit myself. I'm a small scale beekeeper. My wife Sonia and I keep about 28 colonies. We have 3 bee yards. One is at the University of Toronto Scarborough, which is the one on the left. It's a large yard. We have about 15 colonies there. Top right is University of Toronto downtown. I keep 5 colonies there. And bottom right is out by the Toronto Zoo in the Rouge Valley, and I keep about 8 colonies there. So what do we need to do to prepare our bees to survive the winter in Ontario? I think there's 3 key components to that. Colonies need to be strong, they need to be healthy, and they need to have adequate food reserves. And we'll talk about each one of those points, how I do it. I'm going to zip through a lot of this because a lot of us we know. Colony strength. And again, much like Marion, I take most of what I am talking from OMAFRA because we are in Ontario and we got experts. So I like to go with OMAFRA's recommendations. Colony strength, you want to have a minimum 7 to 8 frames of bees in a full colony. It's pretty much ideal for Ontario. But I think also important is the size of the cavity, because you can overwinter nucleus colonies, 4 and 5 frame colonies, but in a smaller box. I think where we run into trouble is when we try to overwinter very small clusters in large cavities. So I myself, I like to have more than 7 or 8 frames bees. I like to have a good, this is what I like to see. I like to see bees right across the box. Now I'd like to tell you all my colonies go into winter like that, but as we know, no, some of them are marginal. Some of them have the 7 and 8, but I think they'll be fine. Colony health. And if I am going too fast, just throw a question or slow me down, anyone of the moderators, because I tend to go a little fast. Colony health. When it comes to colony health, I think our biggest challenge right there is the varroa mite, the varroa destructor. It's really important, I think, for all beekeepers to have a varroa mite strategy, which includes integrated pest management, monitoring, and treating if necessary. I'm not going to get into how to do that or what treatments, but suffice to say, if you're a beekeeper in Ontario, you need to learn the skill of monitoring for mites, whether it's sugar shake, sugar roll, alcohol wash, or sticky board. And if you need to treat, you need to familiarize yourself with what the registered treatments are. And I say registered treatments because there's a lot of backyard chemistry that I for one don't support. I think we have great resources. OMAFRA has the list of registered treatments in Ontario, and I think we should all familiarize ourselves with them because they all have pros and cons when and how to use them. I see Sonia sitting on the ledge there keeping notes. Once you get beyond a couple colonies, it's pretty hard to remember, what did that colony look like? What was the mite counts in that colony? So it's really important to keep good records. We do that. This is a study I like to quote. It's from Ernesto Guzman at the University of Guelph. He believes that the #1 challenge, this study is a few years old, probably a decade old, and I think it's still true today. I think one of the biggest challenges we face and why we lose bees over winter is unhealthy bees that have been compromised by Varroa. I think the second biggest one myself is lack of proper food storage, people not leaving enough honey or feed. We'll get into that a little bit later. So OMAFRA recommends for a single brood box to have a minimum of 70 pounds, and for a double brood box, a minimum of 100 pounds. I like to shoot for about 85 to 90 pounds with a single, and with a double, I like to shoot for like 140, which I don't do a lot of double brood boxes anymore. So in this photo, you can see, you know, a picture of frame of honey and a feed pails top right. I manage singles and I feed over winter. Some people like to debate, you know, is it better to feed honey or to feed sugar? I don't even go into that debate. I mean, bees have been surviving for millions of years on honey. I think it's preposterous to say that, you know, overwintering on sugar is better than honey. I feed and I overwinter on syrup because it works with my management strategy running singles. And we can talk more about that at, you know, at another time, but the key message here is this here: whatever you're doing, whether you're leaving honey or whether you're feeding, bees need adequate stores. If they don't have enough feed for the winter, they will starve. No way about it. Large colony, small colony, doesn't matter. If they don't have enough food, they starve. In this photo on the right, you'll see some shims. We'll talk about that a bit later. And there's some feed on the right called ambrosia. I'm evolving my thinking on this. If you look at this photo is from last winter. In the bottom right hand, you'll see there's some fondant there. What I used to do is I'd feed my bees, and then before I'd prepare them for the winter, I'd put a rim on the top left. You can see this rim here where the big knot is. That's a rim, and that gives me enough depth to get the fondant in there. And what my thinking at the time was, well, this is insurance in case my bees run out of food. And one, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of money. And I'm starting to think it may not be best for the bees, because if they have adequate food stores, adequate honey or syrup below, you're just enticing them up top when they don't really need to be there. They should be clustered below where their food is. I really believe that feed, whether it's honey or sucrose, belongs in the frames, not on top of the bars where the bees have to go get it. Their food should be in their frames the way they store it naturally, as if they were in a tree in the wild. The other thing in this photo you'll see is my inner cover. That's the standard shallow inner cover. I've moved away from these inner covers, and we'll talk about that a bit as we move on, but it's interesting when I look at these photos, how my thinking has changed on a few things. This product on top is the fondant that I do use in emergency situations. I'm not really advocating that or promoting that. There's lots of different fondants. You can make your own, you can make sugar cakes. If you notice this photo, again, this is last winter. Bees are all up top. They're not even on the fondant. The ones that are in the fondant are basically stuck in it. I left them enough feed. They really didn't need that fondant. So as far as temperatures go, cold, bees can survive the cold. Bees do not die from cold. I really find it frustrating in the spring when people start talking about their winter survivability and colonies lost, and you'll often hear, well, I think it was the long cold winter. This is Canada. We've been dealing with long cold winters for years. Well-fed, well-treated, proper size, they can deal with the cold. So I don't buy the cold. And do your need to wrap your bees? That's even debatable for some people. OMAFRA recommends wrapping your bees. It's definitely beneficial. But again, I think big, strong colonies, well-fed, well-treated, could probably get by without being wrapped. I like the wrap because it's a windbreak. It gives them solar gain in the springtime. It helps the queens ramp up and the bees get a little more active in flying in the early part of spring, when you get those temperature variations where it's frost thaw cycles. We have data, and most of the companies who produce wraps have data that your bees will take off earlier in the spring, but it doesn't mean your bees won't survive without them. One of the most important things, I think, when it comes to winter survival is what goes on between your inner and outer cover, more so than the wrap. When I talked earlier about using the thin inner covers, I've now switched to the, this purple and yellow one. Hard to tell from this photo, but they're the deep inner covers. What I typically do, and mine have a hole in the center, it's a feed hole. So I put a couple of layers of newspaper, mainly because I don't want those pads to stick to the bottom. I also put 2 of these insulating pads on top, and then my telescopic cover on top of that. What that does is, if for any reason I want to go in and check a hive in the winter, and I'm not advocating checking hives in the winter, but if there is a reason to do that, I don't have to break the propolis seal, because the propolis seal is below that rim. I just peel these back, peel the newspaper back, and I can have a look at my cluster through the feed hole. Again, I typically use entrance reducers. I did some expansion and splits this year, and I came up short. And so this is this year. This one went into winter this year without an entrance reducer. This one has entrance reducers on. Question a lot of new beekeepers ask all the time, and any of us who are on the beekeeping forums, we see the same questions over and over each year, and we see the same neurosis that we all have. This time of year is like, people see dead bees, and one of 2 things people post on the forums: I see these dead bees in front of my hives. Is that normal? I'm panicking. And some people don't see dead bees in front of their hive and they're panicking. Yeah, it's pretty normal to see dead bees. They clean out their dead. This one down on the bottom had a fair amount of dead bees at the entrance. Marion touched on unblocking the entrance. I had a coat hanger with me. I stuck the coat hanger in there. I clean out the dead bees. And of course, a few of them came out, see what I was doing. But I always clean up the entrances if I'm in the yard taking a look. So this time of year, when Marion was talking about the calendar, you're right. This time of year, it's leave the bees alone. It's February. You shouldn't need to do them. But there are some things. Like, for example, I always like to go through my yard a couple of times in winter just to make sure. On this visit, these photos are all from Sunday. It was -5 Celsius. On this particular visit, on the top right where my dial is for my electric fence, because this is out by the Rouge where there are bears. It's hard to tell in the photo, but that green light's always flashing when it's on. That light was flashing red, which tells me it's on, but there's a short. And I had some ice over in the corner fall, hit my wire, and in the bottom, you see how my electrical wire is on the yellow insulator. It slipped down, was touching my metal pole, which meant it was shorted and possibly not going to work properly if a bear was to try and get in the yard. So that's why I like to go out to my yards and have a peek, just make sure it's going on. Last year in the middle of February, I went up to one of the roofs at U of T, and one of my lids had blown off, even with a brick on it, which amazed me. So, these are sort of some of the reasons why I like to go take a peek. Also had a visitor in the yard. I'm definitely no animal tracker, but I'm going to go with a rabbit. I looked at the chart, and they look like rabbit tracks. And I'm not sure whether or not rabbits eat bees, but you could see the rabbit tracks in front of the hives and a little bump in the snow where the rabbit kind of sits his bum down. And I think they were, I don't know, maybe snacking away on the dead bees, not sure. But they were checking out the front of all the hives, and it's definitely rabbit. I'm going to play a short little video. Again, this is Sunday, and this is -5 in Rouge Valley here in Toronto. It's very short. In hindsight, I shouldn't have done that. I should just lifted it off with the rock solid on so it doesn't slide off later. Nice and heavy. Yeah. So checking the heft of the hives, make sure they're heavy, lots of feed. Okay. So that's it. Very quick inspection, 20 seconds, open, had a peek, they're alive. Did that mainly for this presentation. I typically don't do that. I trust when I go by the weight, by what I, sometimes I peek in the upper entrance. You can see they're alive. Got some dead bees on the landing board. They've been cleaning them out. Had some ice build up there. Clearly there was some moisture running off or maybe some water dripping down behind the cozy. When I see stuff like that, I'll take my hive tool, clean it up, took my coat hanger, cleaned up the entrance, move on very fast, just a minute or two. That's the same one. So this one's interesting here. So this particular colony does not have any dead bees in front, and the landing board is pretty clean. Yeah, so quite often you'll hear people say that, oh, if I'm more concerned, excuse me, if there's no dead bees in front, and I don't know. That hive was fine. But I can see them through the upper entrance. They're alive. And I opened top and peeked through the top, and they were they were fine. So this particular colony does not have any dead bees in front, and the landing. Sorry. Yeah. So what if your winter preparations were not adequate? That's sort of the real question. So when I say, what if your winter preparations were not adequate? A lot of people will find themselves this time of year thinking, I didn't get time to do my varroa treatment in the summer or fall for whatever reason, life, busy, inexperience. It happens. It happens to all of us. Could you do anything about it now? Basically, yeah, you could. It should have been done by now. I actually also think that oxalic acid dribble method should be done. And this, even though I do the sublimation method sometimes, I think this is the safer method and the more effective method, and the method that's recommended by OMAFRA here in Ontario. Should have been done by now, because if it was done in the fall and early winter, it's truly more of a broodless period, and that's when this works best. A lot of people don't realize or believe, but your queens are kicking in now. You will have some brood. There will be some cat brood in your hives. But if you didn't treat and you realize maybe I should have, it's probably too late to do any monitoring, but you can do an oxalic acid dribble. It works between 0 and 5 degrees Celsius is the best time to do it. So if you can get a day in February to do that, that is still an option. The other option is sublimation, or as some people say, vaporization method. Again, should have been done by now, but if it's not, you want to be above 5 degrees, but you don't want to be too far above 5 because you don't want the bees active and flying. So the sweet spot for the sublimation is between 5 and 10 degrees Celsius. I like to try and get it when the bees aren't flying. It's too cold below 5, because if it's, if you're into the minus temperatures, your bees are too tightly clustered, and the vapor just doesn't get the bees. You're only getting a few of the bees on the outside of the mantle. So, but again, it can be done. If you haven't treated and you're worrying about varroa in February, it can be done. Feeding. So if you drop the ball on your feeding, like Marion mentioned in her intro, and I mentioned, when you go heft that hive, you go into your bee yard, you lift your hive and it's so light and your heart drops and you think, oh my, there's no food in there. And this hive is a fraction of what it was when I wrapped up or prepared my, rather than let those bees starve, your options are, this is one I don't particularly like. It's not something I advocate, but it'll work and it'll keep your bees alive, and live bees are better than dead bees. It's what they call the mountain camp method, which is simply putting a sheet of newspaper on top of your top bar frames and putting some sugar on top, and the bees will actually come up and eat the sugar. That's one emergency method. Another emergency method is, if we back up a bit, using one of these commercial products there. Oh, come on. Either ambrosia, which is a fondant, apifonda, or like many people like Michelle. I think, Michelle, you make your own fondant. So there's things you can do to mitigate your bees starving. Again, should have been done by now, but it's not too late to take care of that. So I know I'm blasting through pretty fast here because we have another presenter. I'm not sure how. I'm not sure how you would like to do the questions, Lucy. I'm open to doing questions now or at the end, or I'll leave that to you if there's.
I'd like you to do questions now, please. And do you feel comfortable just to go to the chat and take a look at them and address them from there?
Whatever you like. Why can't I see the chat?
Okay, I can ask you.
Yeah.
How do you weigh your hives?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a great question. I do it through experience by hefting, which is not scientific at all. I have always wanted a hive scale, and there's videos out there who people do methods. I mean, Michael Palmer, who's a pretty well-known commercial beekeeper, he uses the simple bathroom type scale where you lift up the hive on one side, put the hive on, and lift it up, and then do a calculation to ×2 and get your weight. It's not that accurate. If you look at the tech transfer team, they do a much more scientific and accurate method, which is not at all suited for us hobbyist beekeepers. They use a tripod, like a fall arrest tripod that people use in health and safety, and they set it up above the hive with a chain, and they link it to the hive, and they crank up the hive with a winch. So there's finally a hive scale on the market that I'm in love with, and I'm just struggling with spending the $600 to buy it. But there's a company in the East Coast of Canada just developed a scale called Hivetronics is a scale. And it's a digital scale that you slide under the hive. You don't have to do any backbreaking lifting. The scale does it for you, and it gives you a readout on your phone. And so you can move it around the yard. You don't have to buy multiple scales because you just move it from hive to hive. That I saw their initial prototype and liked it, but it had some flaws. And he saw how much I liked it. I wanted to buy it. I said, but because of these particular flaws, I just can't do it. When he came out with this new one, he sent me a text. Says, I know you really liked it. We've ironed out those problems. What do you think? So I would have anyone who's thinking about weighing hives and wants an accurate way to do it is have a look at the Hivetronics. I think it's hivetronics.com, Canadian company. If you can't afford the $600, who knows? Maybe we could all chip in and buy one for the club. But that's what I will. That's right. So that's what I will be doing. I'll be using their scale. But right now I do the heft test, and I know what a good, strong, well-fed colony should weigh, and that just comes with experience. But as Michael Palmer says, when you have more than 10, 15 hives, they all start to feel heavy. But the beauty of the scale is the scale will give you an accurate count, which means you could also save money by not overfeeding. Because if you have a target weight of feeding, or not necessarily feeding, even a target weight of leaving honey, you may think I left X amount of pounds of honey, but when you throw it on the scale will give you a more accurate count. That's a long answer, sorry.
That's fine. No, it's good to hear other people's how other people do things. What point in the year, so about when in the fall, do you do that check to make sure that you're good?
For weight wise,
Yeah.
for me, it's probably a little earlier than somebody running doubles, right? Because running single brood box management, the way I do it is when I pull my honey off, which typically for me is late July, early August. I don't chase that last fall honey flow. Some people do, nothing wrong with that. You can manage it, try and chase that last flow. And the difference between running single brood boxes and double brood boxes, and this is critical. This is the step where most people who are learning to run singles, this is the make it or break it. When I pull my honey off, whether I have 3 boxes or 4 boxes of honey on top, I take a peek in that brood box to see how much they've got stored down there. If they have a frame or 2 of nectar stored, I know I'm good for a week or so, that I don't have to rush back and panic about feeding, particularly if I know there's a fall flow on. If there's a goldenrod is blooming and there's a nectar flow on, I'm not panicking. But sometimes the goldenrod comes a little later and we could be in a little bit of a dearth. And usually you know when you're in a dearth. But if you're pulling your honey in a dearth with a single and there's less than a frame of nectar, if you don't get some feed in there, they could starve within a week, right? With a double brood box, that's less likely to happen because typically they're storing honey in that upper brood box. Did I answer that question?
Yeah. Yep. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Now, can you tell us a little bit about those insulating pads that you had on your hives?
Yeah, that's a product the company I work for makes, a non-apiary product. We call it our inner cover pad. And I'm a really adamant about that. Like I always tell people, what's happening between your inner cover and your outer cover is far more important than wrapping the hive. Your bees are going to generate a lot of heat. A good strong colony is going to generate a lot of heat. It goes up and hits that inner cover, whether you have the shallow inner cover or the deep inner cover, and it'll pass through there and hit your outer cover, causing condensation. It'll drip down and your bees can get wet. Bees get wet, they get hypothermia, they die, just like us. So it's important to have insulation in there. It doesn't have to be our product. It doesn't have to be our inner cover pad. A rigid insulation works just as well. Many people, I think Fran and John, use quilt boxes. I used to use quilt boxes when I had some moray style hives. It's a box where you put some shavings of whether wood shavings. Some people use wool. I don't get hung up on what you use as long as you're using something that has some sort of insulating value, because you don't want that hot air passing through and hitting the telescopic cover. So to me, that's critical. And a second component of that is having an upper entrance, because your bees will generate so much heat sometimes that some of that humidity has to escape, and the upper entrance will help do that. There seems to be some debate on some of the forums these days whether upper entrances are necessary or not. Again, I take my recommendations from OMAFRA and from experienced Ontario beekeepers. The science they have and the data they have says we should be using upper entrances. It's worked for me. My winter losses are always far below the provincial averages. So the pads are the ones made by us at Nod, but again, rigid styrofoam, wool. I also put a few sheets of newspaper underneath. Sometimes what the newspaper does is, in really extreme cases, and I don't know why, it happens sometimes the big colonies generate so much heat that I'll see the newspaper will be wet. It's absorbing some of that moisture. And when I see that, like on a day like that little video I posted, if that would have been all wet, I had some newspaper on standby, I would have changed it. But as of today, it's all dry.
Okay. And what about using a luggage scale? And is the most important part the total weight or the change in weight over the winter?
Two things. Luggage scales work well. I mean, I know lots of beekeepers who use them. I mean, I'm not 25 anymore. I got to tell you, I'm not into lifting 90 pounds. It's like, all kidding aside, my back is not the best because I've had a back injury. And that's why I was looking for a scale where you don't have to do the lifting. With the Hivetronic scale, there's no lifting. The luggage scale. You got to actually lift it up. So one, it'll tell you your target weight, which is, if you got to be minimum 70 pounds, it'll tell you that. And if you're a real keener like me and you just got to get out in the winter, you could go out and weigh that, every 2 or 3 weeks, and it'll tell you some really valuable information. It'll tell you things like, are my bees consuming all their feed middle, end of January, beginning of February, end of February? Are they consuming it all middle March? Because when you see that drastic drop, that's when you know, okay, hey, maybe I was a little light on the feed. I didn't have enough. Now I got to take action, right? And that action becomes either sugar cake, sugar mountain cap method, fondant, homemade or commercially made. But you can't be putting in liquid syrup. It's still too cold to put in liquid feed. So you got to have a backup.
Someone, Jennifer said, we've started to put rigid styrofoam insulation underneath the hive as well. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I've never done it, and lots of people do. I don't see why not. It's sort of it's sort of heck not going to hurt. No, I've known of people who've done it. When you look at some of the experimenting that's going on with the Ontario Tech Transfer team, where they're, take for example, I don't want to get way off topic here, but they got a research project they're doing where they're trying to bank queens and have queens survive over winter in queen banks. And if you look at their presentation, how they're putting the 4 colonies in a quad and wrapping them, they put insulation. Some of it they're doing inside in the controlled room, but some of them they were doing outside. The colonies they were doing outside, they put rigid foam under the colonies. So yeah, it's definitely not going to hurt.
Okay. Does anybody have any more questions? Thank you very much, Tom. That was great. It was really good to see all the visuals too. And hopefully it's helped people with more information, so they have more information to go and start their winter prep for next year. We'll take a short 10-minute break now just to grab a cup of tea, because we've got our main speaker coming up, Daniel Schoenthal, and it's going to be super interesting. So get ready to hunker down and have a listen to him when you get back. We will be back at 7:20.
Excellent.
Ja, wytykamy. Da noi voi numai asta știu, nu schimbi, da? Sau poți să stai și aici dacă vrei.
Sorry, Tom, there was a question from Christopher here, just for those who are still hanging around. Are you concerned about airflow or air circulation through the hive?
Yeah, I was just reading that as you read it to me. Yeah, good question. And I think to answer that question, that is why OMAFRA and the tech transfer team recommend the upper entrance. So, it almost seems counterintuitive to have your heat escaping like that, but it definitely does work. Yeah, I've never done it without an upper entrance. So yeah, I think the air circulation is important. I know some of the European type hives, like the, I forget the brand, but they have some of these plastic and thermo insulated hives where they don't use an upper entrance, but they keep the floor open with the screen bottom board. I've never had screen bottom boards open over the winter. I know people who do, and apparently the hives can survive just fine.
Alan, do you use screen bottom boards, or do you?
This year we're trying the no upper entrance style. And if anybody was present yesterday on Dr. Seeley's presentation, he said that he would rather use styrofoam hives in our climate with no upper entrance because of the level of insulation and the bell shape that is created and then holds the warm air. So I think we should experiment more than just go with the traditional equipment that is more promoted by sellers. I'm not going to give names. But again, as Dr. Seeley says in his book, in nature, they do not have those, right? So I would encourage, beekeepers to at least experiment.
Yeah, I think this is so great because we're just hearing so many different points of view, and then you can figure out what works for you and what you'd like.
Yeah, that's definitely important to experiment. Like, I mean, there's no set way of keeping bees, right? Even the bees change their own conditions as they adapt, right? So whatever works for you, but don't try it on all your colonies, just in case.
I was doing some reading. We should talk about books one day that we're all reading. I'm reading The Song of Increase, which is a different book. But she was talking about it, and I guess it's just when you don't think about stuff. And it was when they're making their own comb, I guess wherever the hive entrance is located, the comb can be really wavy and stuff. And they're regulating the air coming into the hive by creating their comb to protect, I guess, the cluster, right?
Yeah, sometimes they make these rooms where the air gets trapped because they want that for the winter. They want certain places to be always warm. So it's kind of like not necessarily following our parallel frames approach, which is human made, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'll add something in that regard. In my study of feral hives, the wider the entrance, the more wavy the comb inside. If you've got a very small entrance, 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch knot hole, you'll find virtually perfectly straight comb. But when you get to 5 or 6 inches, they start doing things to mitigate the wind.
Yeah.
And is that all year round? Because I know you're from like a warmer climate than we have. Is that all year round you keep the entrances like that, or the entrances were like that?
Well, I've lived in 3,000 foot elevation and other cold climates. A 5-inch hole isn't going to survive the winter. So it's really a question of dealing with the wind flow in the summer and spring. Very rare that a feral hive would survive either pests. You can't defend against a rat or something with the 5-inch hole. But that size of, and usually if they're that big, you're talking a rip or something. So it's really maybe 10 inches long by 2 inches wide or something. And that's just not a survivable entrance, both in the fall for robbing and in the winter for pests.
That's interesting because, in my first year of beekeeping or second year, and might have been beginner's luck, I built a couple of Warray hives and let them draw their own comb. And I kept getting all this advice from people to me, oh, it's too difficult. They're going to draw this wonky comb and it's going to be all, they drew that comb as straight as an arrow, perfectly spaced. But I had a much smaller entrance, so I'm curious if never gave that much thought. I just built it as the plans called for, which was a small entrance, but.
You can also see wavy comb or excess propolis on the bottom if you're using screened bottom boards in a drafty environment, because they're going to want to cut down that air turnover at the bottom. You can see, I've seen 2-3 inch deep propolis walls built across the comb because the people had taken out the bottom board year round, never had put it in. It was just too drafty down there. They'll fix it.
Gonna get a refill.
Lucy, are you sitting outside? You're like dressed full on winter here. What the heck is going on? Are you in the barn? You're muted, darling.
Yes, I am in the barn. Our Wi-Fi, when there are people in the house on it, is not the greatest. So we finally got a heater, but it has to be inspected. And so I didn't want to use all the propane in the tank. So I'm sitting here dressed in my winter woolies.
At least it's not super cold today. I don't know where I was, it was +1.
Yeah, no, I was out here last night listening to Tom Seeley. I was frozen by the time I got in last night.
You did the Tom Seeley last night?
Yeah, yeah. It was,
That was good.
He's worth freezing for.
yeah, I know. Makes you excited, like listening to him talk. I love listening to anybody talk. So I'm happy that we're doing these meetings again, and it's just so interesting, you know, all the different bits of information you get from every different person. So
Yeah, I joined all the beekeepers meetings that I could this winter. I think there's one every week. This is the only advantage of all this
The time zone.
situation. There's so many online.
Rough.
yeah, yeah. Daniel's joining us from California, so
Oh, North California, South California.
North California.
Okay, so the weather is kind of close to ours, right?
Yeah, we had a week of 70-degree plus already this year.
Wow.
They had
We're in-
making like cleansing flights, right?
Well, probably about 70% of our hives brood all winter long.
Okay.
So they're out flying. We've only had 2 days below freezing here, and they were a week apart. So that may chase them in, but that doesn't put them to cluster.
Yeah.
So the issue is active bees burn fuel, and there isn't fuel out there. So starvation is a real high possibility in the early spring.
Yeah.
Okay, we are back. Welcome, Daniel from Northern California. We're excited to hear you speak today. Daniel has, I believe, started a nonprofit organization called Blue Green Horizons, where he collects 30 to 40 swarms every spring and often keeps them, builds them up, and gives them to schools or groups that would like to start beekeeping, which I think is really wonderful. He, as I said, he has a Facebook group. It's very much worth a visit. I was looking at your Apis fortis today. So he had a specially kitted out truck with anything that you would ever need to catch a swarm. So we're happy to have you here today. And if there's anything you need to add about yourself, we'd love to hear it.
Well, I think I explained myself in my presentation. So the only thing that's a little different is, and I'll get into it, is that, yeah, so last year about 70 swarms and about 110 cutouts. So our systems that we have developed are for fairly large production runs, sometimes catching 4 swarms a day. So it may not be the same in every urban area. I'll mention why that's the case here in the presentation. but if you want to share the screen, I'm going to go through a lot of this pretty quickly because I'm going to leave the presentation with your hostess, and there's no reason for us to read a bunch of PowerPoint slides slowly. So we'll try and get to the important stuff and leave lots of room for questions.
DW, are you going to share your own screen or do you want
Yeah.
me to? Okay.
So let me know if you've got that switched.
All participants should be able to share their screen. Are you not able to? Not, you're good.
Is it there?
Yes, it's there.
Okay, well, this is the second time I've given this presentation. I rewrote it last year, so I'm going to be reading off some notes a little bit. I want to thank you for inviting me. We'll go through this quickly, like I said, at least the presentation slides so we can get to questions. What I hope to present here is our process for doing the relocations that we do. Like I said, we post a lot on Facebook and YouTube, although we're going to redo our YouTube this year. I finally got a cameraman. We're located near Sacramento, California. I grew up in Oregon around orchards, and there was always bees around. When I was just about 14 years old, I walked up to the guy in white and said, "What are you doing?" And you probably all know the results of that. Let's see if I can get this all working. Our BGH purpose and mission is to research feral bee behavior, to modernize safe public bee retrieval, and to examine the urban bee-human conflict and to share those experiences. This is part one of a series that I'm doing on, as you can see. This is the second time we've redone this series for 2021 since we were all sitting at home and had lots of time. In my past, in my youth, a couple swarms a year or maybe a cutout or two here and there was all we were doing. When I retired, I formed BGH thought I would catch a few swarms and give them to some garden groups and stuff. And I was not prepared. I was not prepared to catch a dozen swarms in a week and the additional urban issues that come with retrieving a swarm in the middle of a 200,000 population city. What this did was it required us to step back a little bit and to rethink swarm retrieval so that we could build a system that was repeatable and effective that would work in the urban environment. I want to mention at this time that it's really important to be professional out there. If you have a swarm list or the other ways that this information, recognize that you're really representing beekeepers to the entire community. I do mention that if you do a lot of this, that it's really handy to take a FAQ with you. Otherwise, you're going to be talking bees more than catching swarms. One of the first things you can you'll learn in doing a lot of swarm catching is you need to get information before you head out. Luckily these days we've got cell phones and people can text pictures back and forth, but gather some information before you head out to make sure you're prepared. While bee suits are not required to relocate swarm bees, consider that you want some protection because you really don't want the observers to observe an accident, and you always want to be able to finish. And by the way, gravity doesn't care that you're saving bees. Planning, preparation, and process. You need to understand bee behavior, understand your ability. Please take notes, even simple notes, because it's always easier to review than remember. Prepare for the big things by planning and education. Prepare for the little things by being resourceful and experienced. The urban area brought incredible things to light. I had not ever considered that there was going to be a week where I had to catch a dozen swarms. I also wasn't prepared for the crowds of people that show up, including people that are more than happy to walk right up to you, both while we're doing a cutout or while we're doing swarm retrievals. So I had to learn how to deal with crowds. Also, when you, in my youth, you know, you could either get the swarm or you couldn't. In a public space, we really needed to get these swarms because people, if we didn't, the people were going to do something that would cause even more of a problem. And that meant there was a lot of unique places, particularly probably the one that we had to deal with most is height. It wasn't uncommon at all to get called out to swarms 30, 40 feet up in trees. My favorite method when I was a young youth was a pole, a frame of comb, and a cardboard box. Tape was also very helpful. Part of the reason was that I could carry all those things on my bike. As an adult, a 10 frame deep was the top of my list for retrieving a swarm. Both were really good. Of course, the frame on a pole made it very easy to reach up into a cluster. And in the country, leaving a cardboard box until dark wasn't a big deal. That's not the case in the city. The first week in Sacramento, I retrieved 4 swarms, and neither the frame pole or the bucket were working to my satisfaction. The second week came, and after a day of a rainstorm, I got 4 calls in 2 hours. After rushing around all day and after dealing with after dark collections, I decided I needed to develop a system that worked for this unique situation. I greatly underestimated both the fear and the excitement of urbanites, and now I had to balance both collecting those bees and the extremes of the people that were observing. So I decided to make each swarm recovery a class, and for that I needed to have a smooth and calm manner. For that, I needed to reduce the chaos and had a method that didn't stir the bees into a large crowd. As you can imagine, hitting a cluster on a branch and dropping it onto the ground scattered people. And I actually, in the first year, had some people that fell down. And so I just knew that I had to really make a change if I was going to continue to catch swarms in an urban environment. So the first thing I wanted to do when I started looking at this new situation was to go back and understand all the historical information on swarm collecting, i.e. before YouTube. The second, after I completed that, was to review the current available tools, material, and processes. Those were well representative on YouTube. Then the third thing was to put those together into a system that supported the urban environment. I was amazed at how fast that process actually went. History, we're all very aware of all the artwork and stuff that we've seen of history. They teach you an awful lot. Artists tended not to make a woodcut unless it was something really important. I think I'm ahead of myself one. Many of you have seen these, I'm sure, and if you look carefully at each one, you can see the methods they're using to collect the swarms. Everything from bags and boxes, tanging, and comb on a board, and a pole scion, common 2,000 years ago. And of course, you're all somewhat familiar with how we do it today. Really not very different. The boxes are different, bee suits are lighter, but we're really still using the same collection methods of 2,000 years ago. Of course, it's important to understand swarming. There's plenty of good information to understand. I can tell you that the first time I was visiting a feral hive when I was about 17, and they came swarming out of that hole in the tree, forming a cluster about 60 feet away, I was mesmerized. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my life. The other thing about the urban environment is the swarms land everywhere. That's why communicating and knowing what's going on is really important before you head out. Let me catch up here on my notes for a second. So now with all this information, I started building spreadsheets and Venn diagrams and all sorts of things. While the frame on a pole worked great, bees were often scraped when I pulled it down through branches. And it wasn't very chaos reducing, as then I had to take the frame and set it in a box, wait for all the bees to find the box, and then could be as long as an hour or more before it was all calm again. The bucket shape was also something I used several times, but it also had its problems. Dumping that bucket wasn't always as easy or smooth as I liked. And again, I ended up with a very big cloud of bees. High cluster swarms are also a huge, huge problem. So before I go from this, I do want to make sure that when you're taking phone calls these days, really have to ask a lot of good questions. Everybody thinks, you can get 10 bees or a swarm to some people, and their description of, oh, it's the size of a basketball may not be correct. So please try to get as much information as possible. Sorting out what isn't a swarm. My first year, I can say I probably went out to 15 inhabitations, and again, it wasn't a waste of time because we, would come up with a way to possibly remove them, but it's not the same thing as a swarm. And so you really need to understand what's going on. Also in California, the killing of non-honeybees must be done by a licensed contractor or the homeowner. We cannot in any way kill pests on a swarm call. I do want to stress there's lots of good resources for understanding what a swarm is, because with that understanding, we can now use biology to our benefit. I also want to recommend that you track where your swarms are. This gives us a great deal of information and helps plan for the next year. Now let's get down to retrieving a swarm. The queen is the biggest key to this behavior. She wants to be in between two pieces of comb more than anything else in the world. We're going to use this to our advantage. One of the reasons we do so much planning is to stress our safety. With the numbers we get, we need to reduce our effort, keep our time and travel costs down. It's really important to do as much planning as possible. There's so many ways to retrieve a swarm, bag, box, or whatever handy, but what we want to do is retrieve it with the least amount of chaos possible because of the urban environment. So our system takes place in 4 steps. The first step may happen before we get there, but we want to make sure the bees are well settled. If they're not settling, we're going to raise a throne up to the air. We'll talk about that a little later. Or we're going to tang to see if we can get them to settle. Tanging is not a myth. The second step is we want to place the throne on the cluster so that they will walk in, much like I'm sure many of you have seen videos of bees walking into a box. The march is quite spectacular. We want to take that lifting a nuke on a pole is not an easy thing to do. So that's why we're using our throne. We can lift it right up, place it over the cluster, and let it sit there for 5 minutes, allowing that queen to walk down and become safely entrenched inside that throne. Once we know that she's in there, we're going to close it up, because without a roof, it's not a home. We want to protect it from sunlight down here in California. And so we put a roof and any shade protection on it that we need. Then it's just a question of allowing the bees to enter and collect. Sometimes we will leave that until nightfall and go back. Other times we may allow them to settle, such as in a parking lot or something, and then we'll vacuum the excess bees off the outside. The Queen's Throne is really a simple device that combines both the old techniques with our new materials of the present. It's basically every method that you've used to catch a swarm in one simple system. It's, like I said, I started out, so the first thing I had was my frame on a pole, worked great. The second thing I did was I put that frame inside a container to stop knocking the bees off of it. That worked great, but this works even better. This is an example of a throne about 5 minutes after we've pulled it down from the branch. We've put our roof and our shade on it, and the bees that are in the air are clustering to the front. The benefit of using a system like this is that it holds a lot of bees. B, it can be used in the ground, the air. It's simple to make yourself, and it can be raised to the highest we've gone right now is 46 feet. This makes it very easy and very calm to collect swarms throughout almost all the situations that we come into contact with. Lots of people will take our do it in yourself instructions and make some modifications, but I do want to tell you that everything is where it's at for a purpose, because balance becomes really, really, really critical when you go high. I can tell you that 5 pounds of bees in a 5-pound bucket at the end of a 42-foot fiberglass pole is a balancing act. If it's not balanced correctly, you will have some excitement. I'm going to leave some of the discussion for questions, so that's why I'm still kind of going through these kind of fast, but be assured we'll take lots of time when we get there. So our first step, again, we place the throne up over the main part of the cluster, and we want it in contact with the limb. The extension poles we have allow us to lock that in place, and then we just leave it for a period of time. Usually what I'm watching for is the bees leaving the limb. I'm not in any hurry. And once they start moving, they move quite quickly. Once I know that the majority have moved in, I know the queen is safe inside that little, on her little throne. And I'm going to then give the limb a single bump, getting whatever bees on the limb to fall free. Once they're in the air, they're going to search for that smell of the queen, and of course she's in the throne. Once I'm down, I'm going to put the lid and sun protection on. That's immediately going to invoke the Nazdorf response in the workers, and they're going to cluster around the entrance and fan. I'll then take often a brush on my pole. Usually I bring it down, our videos show this more clearly, but I'll bring it down and set it on another pole that I've got hooked to the ground or to something so that I can put the lid on. Then I'm going to go back up to that limb and shake it and brush any bees off that location to get them flying. once the bees are in the air, you can either leave the throne until nighttime, or like in this case, because they were working on the other side of the roof, once all the bees had landed, I just used my portable vacuum and vacuumed out the outside. Transportation becomes very easy. I can carry, 5 or 6 of these around. They completely seal. I can leave the bees in them for a couple days as long as I'm feeding them. They're much like a package you might get in the mail. I keep mine in a north bathroom, and none of the family ever uses that bathroom in the summertime, which is a side benefit, by the way. So before we go on to questions, I want to talk about when you're leaving a situation that you've captured a throne. I want to make sure that you want to make sure you're not leaving too many bees, that you're not leaving tools. I tend to lose one now and then still. Please leave handouts. We leave a handout that suggests donating to the local bee club, which maintains the swarm list. That helps them maintain their website. And I want to make sure that all the people in house questions are answered. I will provide you your host with some links she can share later with some of our videos and other things about the throne. And we'll go on to questions at this point if the hostess is ready.
Would you like me to read them for you, or can you take a look at the chat?
I'm not sure. I'm going to leave the sharing on. I don't think, why don't you read them to me?
Okay. Can you explain tanging, and has it ever worked for you?
Tanging almost always works for me. The myth about tanging is that it stimulates a thunderstorm. So sometimes I will give the pot and the hive tool to a little kid, tell him he's the god of thunder and that he needs to tell the bees to settle down. And therefore I have an automatic tanging device right there, and the kids enjoy it. But the reality is that the low frequencies between 20 hertz and 240 hertz are similar to the swarm pinging sounds that a swarm makes to communicate both the beginning and ending of a swarm. The tanging and thunder may all be tied in together, but it quickly will settle a swarm that's in the air. It will not move a swarm from a cluster, but it will settle them. You want to be loud. Remember, bees don't really hear, they feel vibration. So you need to be making substantial vibration. I carry around an 8-inch steel pot that I use for some other things in the apiary sometime, and a hive tool. I don't think you need to have anything more special than that, but it's almost easier if you do use a system like a throne. It's just to get that throne up in the air at all, and they will smell that comb and will land on it quite quickly. Scions, if you're not using scions, I have some posts on them. They're very effective swarm retrieval method in an apiary. I recommend everybody has at least 2 scions in an apiary.
What is a scion?
A scion, that comes from the term branch, but basically one of the first observations made with the Chef beekeepers was that bees would frequently land on the cloth that they use to filter wax, or broken pieces of comb and stuff. So they would put a cloth with beeswax on it, wrap it around a stick, and put it up as a pole in their apiary, and the bees will land on that as a resting spot. We know that once they rest, that you've got maybe a few hours to a couple days before they'll move on. If the scion is protected with a roof, they'll stay longer. And of course, that gives you plenty of opportunity to collect them. I have a recent post on how to make a bucket top scion, but basically you can just take some comb, brood comb, not honeycomb, and rub it on a stick. And that will encourage a swarm to land on it. I'm sure many of you that have had swarms pop out of your hives will notice they almost always go to the same location. And that's because once bees have landed there and deposited a little bit of wax, all the other bees can smell that. So scions are very, very effective swarm retrieval method, particularly in an apiary. Since you can put it on a string, you can just lower the string, you can keep them up 20 feet where bees love to go. And once the bees are on it, you can just lower it and shake it into a hive.
Do you have instructions on how to make a throne anywhere?
Yes, there's an entire website devoted to the throne that has links to YouTube, do-it-yourself instruction, part lists, etc.
Can you send that to us and we can post
We'll
it?
send it. I've got 5 or 6 links I'll send you
Oh, perfect.
that you
Okay.
can pass on to the club.
Okay, and someone was wondering where you got a pole that goes 46 feet in the air.
Okay, so I have a professional tree trimming pole that is 48 feet total length and costs about $600. Now that's probably excessive. I actually had it for other reasons. But you can get for in the $75 range, you can get a 24-foot expandable pole that will come down to about 7.5 feet, which accomplishes most swarm retrievals.
And after you've caught the swarm, do you just attach the feeder to the top of the throne, or how do you do that?
Yeah, depending on which version of the throne you make, some of them have a 1.5-inch hole in the top with a screen. And so you can just invert a small quart milk bottle and insert it into that hole. Others have a larger screen. And with that, I will usually just put a cloth in there and put some, they don't need all that much sugar, but I can put some, I'll pour some sugar on that cloth.
And I can just get it. Why did you get, how did you get into collecting swarms, or why did you start doing it?
Well, I collected, I've been doing bees for about 50 years. So swarms were just something that you did. But like I said, the numbers were small. There's a long story. I retired early, sold my business. And of course, my partner, after a couple of years, said I needed to get a hobby. So I went back to some things I was doing. And as you well know, and that was about eight years ago, in my early life, we had no mites. Beekeeping was very, very different. So I had heard the issues surrounding Varroa destructor and colony collapse disorder, and was a little puzzled why a pest could be such a problem. So I wanted to get some hives. We had a small farm. It's always good to have some bees around. And on top of that, my daughter went to college and she was scared of bees, so I could. So as soon as I started doing that, I got people, neighbors and stuff, started calling me about swarms, or their friend had a swarm in the backyard or something. So I went and got a couple, and I thought, well, I don't need this many bees. So since I was retired, I formed a little charitable trust and formed Blue Green Horizons. And then we started giving those hives to 4-H, Girl Scout, museums. I have one at a children's museum now, and so on and so forth. And it just all took off from there. One of the things I'll mention, because I didn't go through this in the thing, so the California Valley as you may be aware of, receives over 2 million hives every spring for the months of February, March, and part of April. That's to pollinate the millions of acres of almonds in the state. Let's say if you're a really good beekeeper, commercial beekeeper, probably during that time, at least 5% of your hives may swarm. If you're not a good beekeeper, maybe 10% or more. Of course, you're losing a lot of production then. But if you think of 5% of 2 million hives, that's 100,000 swarms every year get released in the Sacramento Valley.
Wow.
That isn't unique to this location. It is a problem. This isn't a case where we can ignore it. It causes problems with the hobbyist beekeepers because of increased regulation. People don't like having bees flying around all that much. So it's an issue that we're researching and trying to deal with. One of the ways we've dealt with this is by developing a really professional method to collect these. We do contracts with the state prison system, county school systems, and so on and so forth. They need insured people that they can, in many cases, things like Megan Law comes into effect, so on and so forth. So that prohibits them from just calling somebody up and having them come onto their property and collect swarms. So we've tried to set up a nonprofit in such a way that we can show people that it can be done in a very professional way, fully licensed and insured and all that sort of stuff. Then we teach swarm retrieval, and hopefully we can get a handle on this issue in this valley.
If a swarm lands on a scion, will that improve my chances of getting them to find my swarm traps?
Yes, because walk the scion over to your swarm trap, take the lid off, and shake it in.
Okay. Once you catch a swarm, what treatments do you apply after hiving them?
Here in the Sacramento Valley, because these are the high brood rate that we have over winter means we do not get much mite reduction in the winter. And the fact that these are coming from commercial hives, we always take these hives to an isolation apiary, and we'll treat them immediately. By immediately, I mean within a week or so of getting them. They're going to go into a box with some comb, and they're going to start producing. We're going to treat them for mites, and then we're going to observe them before they're moved out into any other contact with bees.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? No. Okay. So that was very, very interesting. It's I think we're all excited for spring to come and have the ability to try and increase our apiaries. And this was a good talk to learn some more things we can do to hopefully make that successful.
So I wanted to add something to that one question about a scion bee helping with your bait traps. And that is actually the case, that even if you're not observing, if the bees get some bees will go directly from a swarm into a bait trap, but the majority won't. So if they do have a place to land close by in your apiary, they're much higher likelihood that they will then go from that scion to that bait trap, because they'll be able to find it. You know, they'll get in that process of looking for a place. And so I do, even if you can't maintain them by being there every day, scions can be very helpful in keeping your bees from going very far.
Thank you, DW. That was exactly my question of scion will help if I am not around and I don't find the swarm, then the scion hopefully will be that landing spot where then they'll find my swarm trap.
Much higher likelihood.
Do you have a height that you normally put a scion at?
There's several things, and of course, these are in some of the do-it-yourself instructions I have on Facebook and stuff. But first of all, a scion needs to be firm. So you need to pull it up firm against a limb. Bees do not like swinging. We've all came across a swarm or two that we were sure was going to, fall off because the limb was in the wind. So you always want to make sure your scion is firm. I find 12 to 20 feet and perpendicular to the prevailing winds of your apiary. Bees want to move out of the smell of the hive, so they generally don't want to move downhill or down or upwind because that's confusing to the workers that are trying to follow. So you want to be perpendicular to your prevailing winds, and they seem the mature queens don't seem to want to go much higher than that 12 to 20 feet. Some of them won't even go that high, but then they'll land on the ground nearby or something. But 12 to 20 feet and firm against a limb.
Do you want to explain this last slide that you've put up here?
Uh-oh. Oh, yeah, this comes back from, let me see if I can even hold it. I got to clear my screen. Is this the early rarely hurts?
No, it was
Let me go back.
the swarm
Hold
and
on.
is worth. That's it.
Well, this is something that is bantered around a great deal. And we sometimes have great discussions over it. But one has to put into context when this was written. And when this was written was before sugar was cheaper than honey. In fact, 1,200 years ago, granulated sugar was probably 10 times the price of honey. So of course, nobody was feeding anything back then. Sugar, fruit juice and some other things was used, but it's not very effective. And again, honey was considered a very inexpensive source of sweetness. So with the ability to feed and so on and so forth, we completely disagree with the old saying. So like I said, we sometimes have some pretty interesting arguments about that. This year I took 6 abscondings. We have a lot of late fall abscondings due to environmental conditions and things here. And those abscondings are frequently what we call softball swarms, which are tiny. We're getting them in September, October. Got one this year in November. And we managed to keep those alive. Not all of them have great queens, but we always like to try because we figure if we can keep those alive, it teaches us how to keep other situations going. So we no longer use this little ditty, but we have a great deal of fun arguing about it.
Tom was just saying that saying came before foundation was around, so foundation also helps speed things up as well.
Yeah, the ability to inspect and understand swarming behavior, which was one of the first things that, of course, came with removable frames. Remember, just pretty much up to when removable frames came around, they still believed there was a king bee because there had to be. Not the drones, but they figured there had to be a king bee who was running the show. We learned a lot with frames.
Mm-hmm. Okay, in this slide now.
Well, both in preparing things, but one of the things we have to talk about in Sacramento here is we really have to stress the splitting of hives to prevent swarming. It's like I said, it's the leading neighborhood complaint. down here. And so I always talk to people about it because they're always afraid that they're going to split and it's not going to work. And what people forget is you can put those hives back together. So I will have a big hive in February, and it's like it's going to pop when I don't want it to pop. So I'll split it. Give them a chance. Maybe I've got a weak queen from one of these abscondings or so on. But if they don't requeen or perhaps kill the queen that's in there, and we still don't have drones, you know, flying and the kind of weather that I want to get a really well-bred queen. I mean, we might get a queen bred in March here, but she's not going to be well-bred. And so we're really wanting to wait till April or May for our new queens, at least our new natural queens. So I'll split, keep them going, let them build out queen cells, go for a couple weeks. That doesn't work, I just put them back together. But if you're late, and I see this all the time down here, and I don't know about up in your climate, but if they've decided they're going to swarm, I don't care what you do, they're going to swarm. You know, they're weeks ahead of you. When you see something in a beehive, the bees have been living with that for some time. They made the decision to build queen cells. They've been working on the queen cells. And just because you take the queen cells away doesn't change. You could give them all the space in the world and everything else. They're going to rebuild queen cells, and they're going to get out as fast as they can. So when we talk about swarm prevention, we really want to stress that early rarely hurts and just late never works.
Okay. Somebody had a question about Africanized bees. Are you having any issues with that yet?
I'm changing the view here. I assume my screen went off.
Yep.
Okay. I am anxious to work with more African bees because they're also an urban problem. We do not have any African bees up here. San Diego is currently their northern limit, and there's very little chance of them coming up much farther. Occasionally, though, somebody will move up from the south with a hive. That was on their backyard or whatever, and they bundle it up and bring it up here. And for some reason, the orientation flight is a little more aggressive than what you'd normally do. And they brought African bees up here. And then, of course, there's always just because they're not African doesn't mean you can't have a very, very feisty hive. It's within their genetic structure that some are going to be. We probably help euthanize 2 to 3 managed hives a year because of aggressiveness. And I mean, they're so aggressive, and the time frame is such that requeening is not going to solve the issue.
Okay, thank you
But
very much.
I'm on. If COVID wasn't happening, I would have gone down last year. I have a friend in Arizona, and they do removals and swarm catching of African bees all the time. And I'm like,
Itching.
I'll carry my suit as carry-on, and I'm on the way, but not right now.
Good luck to you with that. I'm not sure any of us are eager to see any of them up here.
They'll never make it up there. African bees have a unique issue, and it's one of the reasons that they have the limits. It was confusing to people for a long time because the northern limit didn't seem to necessarily match temperature and forage. So they weren't really sure, what's going on. But African bees have one weak point. They fly in the rain. Now, in a tropical environment, that's not a big issue. 90-degree water isn't going to kill a bee. 50-degree water is going to make them unable to fly. So African bees fly in the rain and don't come back. So they have a massive loss of foragers as they reach areas that have cool rainfall. So you don't have to worry about them ever getting up to you.
Good to know. Good to know. Thank you very much for that presentation. That concludes our meeting for tonight, but we can stick around and just have a chat if anybody would like to. Other than that, we will see you next month. We have some interesting speakers next month. We have Michael Bush from Practical Beekeeping. And we have someone from the OBA Tech Transfer coming to talk to us about antibiotics. So that will be our March meeting, and hopefully we'll see some good weather come with that.
OBA. OBA antibiotics and Michael Bush on the same night. That'll be interesting.
I know.
I was just like, oh man, is that a good thing? But
it's reality, okay? It's reality.
yeah, maybe I should just tell him to come in a little bit later. I won't tell him that.
No, I think Michelle's right. It's reality.
But if anybody would like to stay on and talk about the way that we arranged for how we sent out when we got swarm notices last year through the website or by phone calls, Fran and I worked together and we made a little spreadsheet up of everyone who was interested in catching swarms and what areas they were willing to work in. And then that's kind of how we disseminated all the swarm calls throughout the season. It's a very short season for any of you who don't know. It's really just kind of mid to end of May through until beginning of July. But sometimes, you can get a lot of them. But after listening to DW's presentation, I would like to kind of formalize a bit better. First of all, I'd like all of our beekeepers obviously to go out with information about the UTBA. The same thing, if we can get some donations, that's great, but also to talk about that we're here. But I was also thinking of maybe having like a throne building session, even if we just do one virtually, so that everybody who would like to catch swarms could get together. We could get together online. And Tom, you already have one, so that's awesome. Did you build it from DW's plans? Unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry. No, I thought you were asking about the poll.
Oh, no. Yeah, no. I would love, once we get DW's plans, as you saw, it's pretty straightforward. There's a bucket, a hole, screen, a lid. He's cut some some foundation, some plastic foundation, and it's inside to create that kind of cozy spot where the queen can land. So there's those two pieces of foundation that are screwed into place with the bee space in between. And I think it just is super practical to be able to have a throne. I've been following DW now for a couple of years. I read all of his posts. He also runs a website, a Facebook group called Beekeeping Hacks, where I have got some amazing hacks for myself, not just on swarms, but all kinds of things. And I myself have been able to share some stuff, and it's been like a really great interchange of information. That Beekeeping Hacks Facebook group is super strict. There's no nonsense posts and all that kind of stuff, no politics, whatever. It's really, really great. But what I was thinking is if we had all our swarm catchers together, we all kind of got our list of equipment, and then we could kind of build these thrones together, that we would be so much more effective, like at actually catching that swarm. I've caught almost every swarm I've gone out to, but certainly some of them have taken a really long time, and I can see how his equipment would make it just so much more efficient. Anybody want to chime in? Are they interested in swarm catching and that kind of stuff? It's casual time. You can just unmute and chime in. You don't have to. Do we have any people who would like to catch swarms who've never done it before, who are on tonight?
Yeah, me.
Sheila, you, okay.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to learn.
Yeah, so maybe that's what we'll do is we'll get the I know all of the stuff is just stuff that we have around our houses. Like, you know, we all have foundation, we all have buckets, we all have screen, we all have that stuff. So maybe we'll put it together and make like a swarm catching, you know, a queen throne building day. And we'll get online and we'll put our stuff together. And then, like I said, Fran runs the incoming requests from the public, but we'll make sure that we have our database set up early this year so that when we do get calls from the public telling us about swarms, that we're able to disseminate them quickly. We're pretty good on the incoming end because we've already been doing it for a couple of years. We always know to ask for photographs, main intersections. Like we get a pretty good sense of what the swarm is. So far, you know, we haven't gone out to get a swarm and had it be a hornet's nest or anything. We're pretty good about that. But, you know, I've certainly picked them up off of parking meters. I've picked them up off of trucks. I've picked them up off of like really strange kind of things. And I think that this, being able to have this thrown would really, like I said, increase my the ease and the efficiency rate of capture.
I made a simple version of his DW's device. Basically, I used a 5-gallon pail, and I screwed a female thread to the bottom, so I could thread in a extension pole.
Mm-hmm.
I've got the 30 plus foot extension pole, but I never thought to put comb inside like he does. That's an interesting.
Well, he says that the queen likes to bury herself between the two frames or between the two pieces of the foundation, which just totally makes sense because it's a nice protected spot for her. And you can see why it would be such a great lure.
Have you ever used it, Tom, your pole?
Yeah.
Does it wiggle when you have it up that high?
Yeah, it takes a little bit of skill, and it takes some. It's like it's a DW, yeah. There's some physics involved. Like it doesn't seem heavy. Like, you know, when you take that empty pail and you put it up 20 feet or so, and you bang the branch and the bees fall into it, and then when you start lowering it, it takes a real kind of balancing act to not drop it too fast. And the challenge I have where it needs to be tweaked is that when you get it lowered to the ground and then you have to empty those bees from the bucket into a hive, that's the shortcoming on my device. His is a little different. So yeah, there's some.
I mean, I think that his device, you can kind of, you know, drive the bees right in that bucket, right to your apiary, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something I never thought of. Like typically what I do is I think, okay, now I'm going to bang them into a box, right?
Yeah.
It's actually in hindsight, or not in hindsight, now that someone with more experience is talking about it, having a lid with a vented lid or a screen lid, it's better to do that in the apiary. Take the pole off so you're not dealing with the 30-foot pole, and yeah, live and learn.
Yeah, well, I've shared the photograph of what happened to me when I just used a piece of screen on the top of my bucket, and I used what I thought was a very strong piece of elastic to secure the screen onto the bucket. And then I took the bucket and I put it on the front seat beside me, and I was driving down the road, and all of the bees were clustering on the underside of the screen, and the weight of these pounds and pounds of bees hanging on the inside of the screen sucked the screen down into the bucket. And then I had, 3,000-4,000 bees flying around in the car in my front seat.
Wow.
So I've definitely done it wrong.
I was intrigued by the tagging thing.
Yeah, so absolutely. I am going to start tagging now. I always thought it was kind of more wives' taily, and I've never tried it, but like, what can it hurt? Like to have like a metal pot and you're, your swarm or your hive tool. What the heck, right? Has anybody here tried tanging? Fran? John? It sounds like something maybe you've tried. Look at what you gave.
No.
You're smiling. You're smiling, Gabriel. Have you tried it?
No, no, I haven't tried it. I only caught the 2 or 3 swarms in my own yards from my own hives, nothing else. So I don't have much experience with swarms. But I never heard about tanging or of a scion, or so for me these or a throne. So for me these were all new.
I am totally, I totally get the scion, because I know when I used to work in my friend's bee yard and I used to manage his bee yard, the bees that swarmed always went to the same evergreen. And I'm telling you, if there's any tree that's hard to get a swarm out of, evergreens are awful because they're full of like little needles, and the branches. This one here, I don't know what kind of evergreen it is. I'm not great on them, but the branches go down. They're not horizontal. So the branches are all going down. The branches are all touching each other, and that cluster is deep inside all of these pine needles. And there was just no way to ever get the swarms out of this tree, but they always landed on the same tree. So now I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm saving all of my broken poles, like my mops, and I'm just thinking like, oh, whatever. And I am building some scions, and I'm going to put them up like close to my swarm traps. What the heck? One new thing.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
We experienced that at Nod in our company bee yard, or we have a bee yard for our employees. And because, swarms always happen at the most unopportune time, right? And, but one of the phenomenons there is that they always swarm to the same tree, the exact same tree all the time. Easy to get them out of that tree. And I just never gave it any thought as to why. Now I know why.
Yeah.
How do you know when the swarm is settled?
Well, so I've watched a lot of swarms leave the hive, and most of them settle pretty quickly, but basically all of the bees have more or less left the air. So when they come out of the hive, you've got your anywhere from 3 to 10,000 bees, and they're flying around, and then they land on the spot where they're going to collect as a swarm. And you'll notice there's like 10,000 bees in the air, then there's 7,000, then there's 3,000, then then there's just a couple of hundred, and then at some point there really aren't any more bees that are looking for the swarm. The only bees left that are flying around are the ones that the scouts are now just leaving to go and look for, their new location. So that's the point I would call it settled, is once all the bees from the air have landed on it. And it can take anywhere from 20 minutes up to about an hour, depends.
Yeah, if you can get on a ladder and actually stand there and stare at the cluster of bees in the tree, you'll actually see them doing the waggle dance. You'll see the scouts coming back doing their dance on the swarm.
Yeah.
So as long as you're doing that, they're still looking for a new home.
Yeah.
Has anybody seen the documentary that's on CBC Gem about bees?
Which one? What's the title?
I don't know. It's almost like a diary of a bee. Goes through the whole. It's really interesting. It's got a lot of, really close-up pictures of the bees.
Yeah, I've actually seen it. It's really nice. It's very educational. It's good. It's good for kids as well. It's in the first person.
Do you remember the name of it?
It's called the Bee's Life, possibly?
No, it's from the Nature of Things program. I just looked it up. It's called A Bee's Diary.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very cute, and it's good. It's a wonderful general knowledge for sure.
I'll put it in the chat because this is a recorded session, And then that way, if anybody's looking for it, they'll be able to, there it is. There it is there, if anybody wants to take a look at it. You're right, I have seen it.
Awesome. Okay, I think we're done. Thank you for coming. And we
Thank you.
will see you in March. And we missed we missed Henry with all his sound effects for his BQT.
Yes, yes, Henry. It'll make it more, it'll make it, like more special next time when he comes back.
That's right. Okay, good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night. Thanks,
Right.
guys.
Thank you, Tom.
Pleasure. Good night.